Welcome to our midweek thought, and this week we're in Matthew chapter 5 verse 4. I'll read it for us. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Quite a well-known verse, but it is a puzzling one, particularly if you're mourning and feeling that the comfort you long for, is a long time coming. More on that towards the end. But first of all, what is this mourning? What kind of mourning does Jesus have in mind? I think the verse above is helpful, which says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven," another famous verse. So the kingdom of heaven, God's rescuing reign, it belongs to those who are poor in spirit. Not financially poor, but those who approach God and they know that they've got nothing to offer him. They're spiritually bankrupt. They've got nothing in their hand to bring him, to impress him, to buy their way into his kingdom. It's all down to him and what he must do for them. Those are the ones to whom the kingdom of heaven belongs. Isaiah 66 says something similar in the Old Testament. "This is the one to whom I will look, he who is humble and contrite in spirit." Those are the people God's kingdom belongs to. And if that's the immediate context of our verse, I suggest that the mourning Jesus has in mind is mourning over sin. Or maybe a bit more widely, mourning over sin and the consequences of sin. The way that sin has wrecked parts of our life. The way that sin has spoiled certain relationships. The way that sin actually has spoiled the whole world, if we think back to Genesis chapter 3. Blessed are those who mourn over sin and the consequences of sin. So, obvious question, are we mourning over sin? One thing, of course, to tick the doctrinal box and to say, yes, we agree that we are sinners, but do we mourn over it? Does it cut us up? Leave us feeling gutted about ourselves and the way we've lived? I think we all know from human relationships that it's one thing to tick the box, as it were, and say, look, I'm a sinner, I might have got things wrong, I do wrong things from time to time. That is very different to approaching the person whom we've wronged and coming empty-handed and saying, look, I'm so sorry for the way I've hurt you. I can see what I did was wrong. No ifs, no buts. I've been challenged by a Christian book recently to be confessing my sin more specifically and regularly to the Lord. And I think it's helped me to mourn over sin a bit more. Not as much as I should, but a little bit more. And the funny thing is that as we mourn over sin, actually we find paradoxically it leads to great comfort, even in the here and now. Because we're reminded that our standing with God does not depend on our own performance. How could it, with all these sins in our face that we're confessing? It depends on God's grace alone. Tim Chester has a helpful insight in his book. He says that sin in itself doesn't keep anyone from God because he's reconciled us to himself in his Son. But we can still keep our distance from God because of sin. Either because we're choosing sin over God, or because we're just ashamed. And this unconfessed sin is just causing us to hold God at arm's length and not to approach him. Jesus invites us to acknowledge sin, to mourn over sin. Blessed are those who mourn. And as we do that, we do enjoy a taste of God's grace and comfort again. As I say, we're led to the cross. We're reminded of the gospel. We're reminded of God's fatherly welcome of us, which never depended on our performance, but always on his grace. And one day, this partial taste of God's comfort, if I can put it like that, will be a full dose of God's comfort, as every consequence of sin, as every sin itself, as every shred of sin is removed. One day we will know the full comfort of a sin-free world restored, sin-free life restored, and every shred of sin is gone. So here's the thought, and it's a very practical one. For this coming week, why not try and say more prayers which begin, Father, I'm sorry for whatever it is. You might say, well, what morbid advice? That's a fast track to feeling miserable, surely. Well, just see what happens as you do it. Father, I'm sorry for whatever it is. Why not spend a bit of time each day doing that and just see if Jesus is right? See if mourning over your sin causes comfort even in the here and now while we wait for the comfort to come. See if mourning over sin becomes a motorway to enjoying more of God's comfort that he's given us in the Lord Jesus Christ.